Dave Zirin returns on Edge of Sports Radio, where sports and politics collide.
Boom, we're back here on Edge of Sports Radio. The absolute intersection of sports and politics this past week has been in the state of Indiana, where NASCAR, the NBA, Major League Baseball, even though they don't have a team in Indiana, have all come out against Indiana's Religious Freedom Restoration Act. And we're going to talk about what that is with our next guest, editor-in-chief of the Progressive magazine, Ruth Conniff. Ruth, how you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me, Dave.
Oh, it's so appropriate because the other organization that's come out against the RFRA is, of course, the NCAA, because the Final Four is in Indianapolis, and also in the Final Four is your hometown team,
the Badgers, man. Yeah. I mean, we've been driving across the country. We live in Wisconsin. My husband, my 3 daughters, and I, they're all in the studio with me right now. We drove out to Washington, D.C. to be on your show, see our family members.
In that order.
And we may have to make a little detour on the way back to avoid Indiana.
Yeah.
But, we're rooting for the Badgers, and we're watching this whole thing unfold.
That's awesome. And your husband, Mitch Cooper, public defender in the state of Wisconsin.
That's right.
Absolutely shamed me in the commercial break. And I will take this shame because I'm so embarrassed. I called Ray Rice the greatest football player in Rutgers history when, of course, it's Paul Robeson. Oh, my God. You have no idea how many points I just lost.
Yeah, we love it when you get embarrassed.
You know what we should have done is done a little post-edit production. Or like Paul Robeson, like it goes over Ray Rice. You know who's the best? It's Paul Robeson. So that's what we should have done. So let's try to figure this out with me, Ruth. The Indiana Religious Freedom Restoration Act. Explain, if you could, what it is and why there's so much uproar that's in response to its signing by Governor Mike Pence.
Well, the act itself, which was signed by Mike Pence last week, declares that it prohibits state and local governments from burdening a person's right to exercise religion unless the government can show a compelling reason and the action that they are forced to take is the least restrictive means of achieving it. Basically, it's an Indiana law promoted by the far right, by religious groups, by the American Family Association there, to protect businesses from having to serve customers who are gay and lesbian or participate in any way in tolerance, diversity, and support of gay and lesbian couples. I mean, that's really the driving force behind this supposed restoration of religious freedom. And like so much of what the right is looking for, it conflates the idea of freedom for individuals with a freedom for businesses, because unlike the federal law that this is somewhat modeled on, it spells out what a person means. And a person for the far right and for residents of Indiana means, apparently, in addition to a zygote, it means a long list of things, including an LLC, a corporation, a company, a firm, a society, a joint stock company, unincorporated association. This is their idea of a person. So federal law is talking about individuals and their religious freedom. The far right has gotten together and said corporations are people, therefore corporations need to have religious freedom. And then secondly, not only in the case where the government is involved, but in a completely private sector situation where there's no government involvement whatsoever, this law explicitly applies, which is another important difference from the federal law.
Wow. Yeah. Corporations are people, my friend, kind of shines through this. That famous line from Mitt Romney. So, yeah, you mentioned the federal law, and that's something the defenders of the law keep saying. They say, Bill Clinton signed this law in 1993 and no one cared. It's in 19 other states, no one cared. You just gave some great evidence about how the Indiana law is different than the federal law. But I wanted to ask you, first of all, can you describe a little bit more detail what the federal law is and how it's different? And also, I just wanted to ask you if you remember, because I know you were, doing great political writing in the early mid-'90s. Do you remember when that law was passed, and do you remember if there were any of these questions raised at the time?
Well, it was a completely different environment because we weren't talking about, basically the states' rights argument, which is what Indiana is making. They're making the argument that institutions and businesses need to have their freedom protected because they like to discriminate, and it hurts their feelings to be told they have to treat people equally, right? I mean, this is an old, long, ugly history of argument that we're dealing with here. The federal law came about because a Native American man in Oregon partook in a religious ritual involving the use of peyote and was fired from his job when he failed a drug test. And it was also sponsored by Charles Schumer and Ted Kennedy. And it was really about the rights of individuals to practice their religion, even if it flew in the face of societal norms or rules and regulations, that those, if there wasn't a compelling government interest in enforcing those laws, then people should be free to practice their religion. So in some ways, it was the exact opposite. It allowed individuals freedom. It didn't allow institutions the freedom to discriminate.
Wow. So in other words, that law from 93 was more like, say you're a Jewish and Muslim person and your office has bacon day and you say, no, I don't want to eat bacon, it's against my religion. And they say, what? You're not a team player, you're fired. Right. That would protect you in that situation.
Right.
By the way, I'm open to be hired anywhere that has bacon day. I'm just putting that out there. Another question for you. This is all really helpful. One of the things I wanted to ask you about is this Supreme Court decision from a couple of years back that was called Hobby Lobby. How does the Supreme Court decision on Hobby Lobby, can you explain what that was? Because I'm not going to explain it well. And also say, how does that affect these religious freedom laws that are passed at the state level?
It is the exact same argument. The argument in the case of Hobby Lobby was that under the Affordable Care Act, religiously run businesses like Hobby Lobby, which is run by some Christian fundamentalists, are offended and appalled at the idea of providing health insurance coverage for birth control prescriptions for their female employees. And because this is so deeply offensive to them, they need to be exempt from that. So their female employees are out of luck because they object to their use of birth control and abortion services. And so they went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court found that, yes, in fact, Hobby Lobby has the religious freedom right to discriminate against its female employees, which is a disaster and provoked protests all over the country by women who do not appreciate, either their business owners. I mean, we've seen laws like this pop up at the state level where right to lifers want pharmacists to be able to decide whether or not to dispense your prescription to you based on their personal moral belief about whether or not you can take that pill. That is preposterous, but unfortunately was upheld by the Supreme Court. And it's very similar to the Indiana law because, again, it's protecting an institutional right. It's treating a corporation as a person. It's talking about religious freedom as it applies to a powerful employer and their ability to stand in the way of an individual to exercise her rights.
You're terrific, Ruth. I have to say, I like explaining these laws so they make sense. And when you explain it, it almost makes me it makes me really angry at the way this debate has been basically just lied about. Like, why are people singling out Indiana? It's in all these other states, too. Bill Clinton signed this. What's the big deal? And it's like, well, no, it's a huge deal, if I'm hearing right, because of Hobby Lobby and because of the power it gives corporations and businesses to basically have the same rights as people.
Yeah, I mean, if you believe that when you say person, you put an asterisk next to it and you say an LLC, a corporation, a publicly or privately held entity, it's just preposterous. People are people, right?
Now, I know that you also are someone who observes things like social movements, the power of social movements. And are you surprised at all by the backlash against the Indiana bill? Where did this come from? How did it happen?
Fantastic.
Does it surprise you, though?
The NASCAR participation, I have to admit, surprised me a bit, right? Not exactly a champion of progressive values in my mind. However, I think what we've seen is this massive seismic cultural shift on this issue of gay rights. And I think it's because it doesn't matter where you live in the United States. It doesn't matter what your religion is. It doesn't matter what your politics are. You have friends and relatives who are gay, and those people are coming out, as Asa Hutchinson's son did, and said to him, Dad, you're discriminating against me. You have to take the right position on this. And
Asa Hutchinson, the governor of Arkansas, who looked like he was about to sign copycat legislation.
Yes, and is now not going to sign that. And, we have to say, breaking news today, the Indiana legislature itself has written a lengthy amendment because they're dealing with the backlash by businesses, by sports franchises like the NCAA, as we mentioned, coming out very strongly against this form of discrimination. It's bad for business. It's embarrassing for Indiana. Indianapolis businesses with signs in their windows everywhere saying, hey, we want everybody. We're not with this discriminatory law. So now there's an amendment today which for the first time in recorded history enshrines gay rights into law in the state of Indiana, which does not treat gender or sexual orientation or gender identity as a protected class. But now there's an amendment. So the same Republican legislators, I do. I think they're going to whip this thing through because the Final Four is this weekend, man, and they're facing a major boycott. So they really need to get their act together. I mean, the timing of this is perfect, and it's because of sports. These sports have really led the way here.
Yeah, I think you're right about that because you've seen all of these corporations and all these unions, everything from Apple to AFSCME, say they're going to pull their events out of Indiana. But I think the NCAA was the first entity to say something.
Yeah, the NCAA, I think, looks great on this. And,
which I'm conflicted about.
Me too.
But, when President Mark Emmett made his statement that this law violates the core values of higher education, diversity, supportiveness, and inclusiveness, that was a very significant statement. And he went further and said, we're going to have the Final Four this weekend. We want you to know that this law doesn't go into effect until July. And the city of Indianapolis does protect gay and lesbian people. So we want you to come to the games. We want you to cheer for the teams. But we're going to look at our entire association with the state of Indiana. We're going to look at pulling NCAA headquarters out of the state unless they change this right now. And the pressure that has brought on the state is tremendous. And you see, this is a right-wing problem. This is not our problem, Dave. I mean, we can sit here and talk about it, but really anger is not so much the response. I think it's very positive because the right is scrambling. They were so wrong about where the country is on this.
Yeah.
They have lost this battle. They didn't know they had lost. And now they're doing backflips trying to retract it.
Yeah, and let's kick it forward to the 2016 presidential race because Jeb Bush has looked like a joke around this issue. He's jumped back and forth, and it looks embarrassing, particularly if you're a Republican who wants a strong leader, quote unquote. He's looked anything but strong. You, of course, Mike Pence, who was rumored to be running. I mean, he's now just ridiculously radioactive. But you're from Wisconsin. And at least once a week, I get a nervous text from my sister asking if I think Scott Walker's going to be president. And I haven't heard Scott Walker's name connected with this issue.
He made a statement.
What was his statement?
His statement was he was supportive of the Religious Freedom Act. Every Republican candidate in the field came out and made this statement because they're going to run in Iowa with the crazy right-wing base in a primary that demands that they be as far right as they can get, although only Marco Rubio went way out on a limb and supported active discrimination against gay and lesbian people.
Wow.
But Scott Walker, like every other member of that Republican presidential field, came out with a strong statement in support of Indiana. And now we'll watch the backpedaling because now they've gotten the memo that this is really a loser.
Yeah, so Jeb is already backpedaling. That's already in the news. People can go online and see it. Do you expect that now from other
I think they're going to be scrambling.
To?
It's going to be a joke. They're going to be everywhere making contradictory statements, trying to maintain the support of the base and trying to get where they're supposed to be, like the right-wing Republican legislature of Indiana, who've now written this entire long passage saying they're for gay and lesbian rights.
And the end result is that they end up looking weak to a base that is all like caught up in this kind of I'll call it toxic masculinity of we need someone strong to take on Hillary Clinton and all the rest of it.
Yeah, it's going to be a mess for them and more power to them scrambling around in that mess.
Wow. Ed, last question for you before we go. First of all, thank you so much for joining us. I know you're not a huge sports fan, but the Wisconsin Badgers being in the Final Four, is this must-see TV for you?
Absolutely. We are not going to miss it. We are going to be all over it.
And do you have a favorite player on the team? Or
well,
you have Frank the Tank family?
Yeah, Frank the Tank. That's that's our family. We're behind Frank.
And it's so. And Bronson Koenig, great player.
That's where I got to bring my daughters in to start talking.
Oh, no.
I got to stop talking really fast.
No, that's not happening. We're going to go to break. We'll be back with the daughters to wrap up the show.
Edge of Sports Radio with Dave Zirin. We'll return after this.